Hi, this is Mr. Haig, and today I'm going to be teaching you some watercolour techniques. Let me first explain what I have here. I have 4 samples, and I'll go through each one of these and demonstrate how you can actually produce them. And I've also got a watercolour painting that I've produced. And the reason I've put that here is so that I can demonstrate that I've used these techniques within this piece of work. Okay, so we have our watercolour, we have some tissue paper, we have some water, and we have a mixing palette. And of course the brush. And that's all we need for this demonstration. First of all, we have a thin wash box here, and I'm going to show you how to produce a thin wash. Firstly, you need to put your brush and saturate it in the water, and then I'm using crimson here, which I've just started in the box, as you can see. And we need to make sure the brush is quite wet and we've not made it too thick on the brush, and then we can just carefully and neatly start to apply the watercolour work. Now what you can do at this point is add a little bit more water to your brush, and you get a nice thin wash. Where would we use this? Well, I think skies immediately. If this was in a blue perhaps, or a sunset, you would have a nice thin wash to give the effect of the sky. I've also used it within the apple for the lighter areas as well, so when you do have highlights on any objects that you're trying to paint, then it's definitely worth using a thin wash. So let's go to the gradual fade. Very similar to the thin wash. We're going to mix the crimson, maybe a little bit thicker this time as well, because we want it a little bit darker at the top. There we go, you can see the richness of the colour there. Now, we don't want it as thick as this all the way through because it's a gradual fade. So what I now do is I dip my brush back into the water, and then where I've just finished that paint, I can add some water, and as you can see it fades out. And then for the last bit, I'm just going to add a little bit of water to the last bit here. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. You can do it a little bit neater than I've done here. It really doesn't matter at this stage, it's about trying out the techniques. Okay, so you can see the thin wash and gradual fade. Now we have wet on wet, and as it sounds, we need to put wet down initially. So I'm going to rinse my brush out, and then I'm going to apply a thin layer of water. Okay, now what happens is when we apply our paint now to this wet, it has what's called a bleeding effect. It bleeds out. As you can see there, you get a reaction from the paint with the water, and it's fantastic for producing texture within your work. And you will get a random feel to the actual sample. You can't control this, and that's absolutely brilliant because you want the paint to do its own little bit of magic, if you like. Okay, and if I wanted to, which I'm going to demonstrate now, I'm going to add a different colour. I'm going to add an orangey red here. Okay, now you could experiment with different colours, different amount of paint, thick, thin paint, wet on wet. It really is endless, the different amounts that you can actually, amount of samples that you can actually create using this technique. Right, blending. Let's move on to blending. We're going to use the crimson again, and then we are going to do as we've done previously with the gradual fade. We're going to produce a section which is crimson. Then while the paint's still wet. Again, I'm going to go back to the sort of reddy orange colour here, and then I'm going to add it just over the top of where I've just finished my last bit of crimson. Now, I'm not happy with this at the moment because the idea of blending is that you get a smooth transition. So what you can then do is, once you've taken a bit of the paint off, you can then start to blend again just to try and get that gradient in there. There we go, much better. Now for the last section, I'm actually going to put a little bit of yellow on there, so we've got a 3-colour blend. There we go. Okay, so there we go, that's our blending bar. So we're going to zoom out a little bit here so you can see you've got wet on wet, gradual fade, thin wash, blending, and if we look at the actual final piece here, you can see, you'll probably be able to recognise and identify all these techniques have been used on this apple here, and it's for you to experiment and to try out those techniques until you find what works for the different challenges of producing a still life piece of work in watercolour. Okay.